Welcome to The Stylish Pen, where Susan Scott and I have authentic conversations on the sometimes heartbreaking world of writing, editing, and publishing. Today, you're in for a special treat because we are going to show you some of the editing process that I went through for my book. So, welcome. Let me start this screen sharing so everyone can see it. So this is my book. Susan and I worked on it for probably close to a year, right? And
yes, you were very patient about that. That was good.
no, it was actually a really fun process. So I'll just start talking, and Susan, you can jump in at any moment if there's something you want to say and pick apart about it. Okay. So the first thing that I wanted everybody to note is the actual name change of the chapter. It's more active. The new chapter is the one on that says Chapter 1. Are we really doing this? You can see the old chapter is a lot more passive. And this is something that we added at the end of pretty much at the end of the process, right? We had, because we had 3 stories going on at the same time, we had a lot of chapters and it was, we added them, the dates kind of helped us while we were doing this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing for people to think about. Sometimes you can get through an entire draft, and that's when you finally have perspective on on how the whole book starts. Then you can go back to the beginning and go, oh yeah, wow, where should this actually start? And because typically the work improves as the manuscript develops, right? Or as the editing goes. So this was a great piece. You go back and go, okay, what is the actual beginning? What's going to hook people? What actually points to where the book is going. So this is such a lovely way of thinking it, where people start a book, but you can go back at any given time and rethink the beginning, because the beginning is crucial. So this was you were very gracious about working on all this, redoing things. So yeah,
of course. Also interesting to note that in the original, we actually started with quite a bit of backstory and a longer explanation. But I think we both knew that would need to be cut. It was more just how I wrote it in the first place, but that whole section was cut. And then pieces that were relevant we found other spots for them throughout the text.
Yeah.
And so as you can see right now that we jump straight into the story. It's already happening. We'll figure out backstory later. We'll explain that after. Also, this is not visible on the screen, but the entire chapter is a lot shorter and the pacing is a lot quicker than it was. So it really just moves along at a nicer pace.
Yeah. And it starts with a bit of drama and the question. I always like the question, so we start the story with wondering out loud with the narrator, like, yeah, why would someone do this? Who in their right mind would move to Warsaw in the middle of the winter? It doesn't seem like a very good idea. There must be a reason to this, but it's kind of fun, right? Your reader is kind of a co-conspirator with you at the time. Yeah, who are these people? Why would they do this? November, Warsaw, not feeling the love just yet. So
right, it's not a summer vacation.
Right.
We can note too that since just to jump back to the chapters for a second, that so the original book, because of how I wrote it, had 42 chapters, which was, I know, really painful, but we didn't even lose that many words at the very end, but we managed to reassemble the chapters so that it wound up actually being 22 chapters, which was much easier to deal with.
All right. Yeah, it's easier just as a reader to open it and see 22 chapters as opposed to 14. You just want to make the read from the word go. You open the book, you see it, and you feel like yeah, I can go there, as opposed to, do I really want to go there? Wow, that feels like a lot. Same number of words. It's so interesting how the brain interprets what's on the page. Yeah. And then table of contents, just be kind to your reader, be inviting to the reader. But in your draft, you can do whatever you want, right? The draft is a playground. It's a big sandbox. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's your brain dump. It's just getting everything onto that
exactly,
page.
exactly.
So this is the next part, which is actually really interesting because also in the original, um, the chapter 3 was actually what's chapter 3 now was actually chapter 2. So we kind of gave my story a little bit more breadth, I suppose, a little bit more width. We gave it a little bit more attention. And then we just, because we decided we just needed a little bit more of my story before we jumped back in time to talk about my grandparents.
Yeah, and
And
I really like this, that in the green there, where you explain right away why we need to understand the family story, because the whole book is the interleaving of the family story and your story. But it's a very cheeky way of putting it. I really, really like this, because I'm starting the family story with my grandmother. Warning, please don't get too attached to the woman you're about to meet. And it's not because she, dies in a firing range. It's just that she's a complicated figure, and I like that. It's just very refreshing in a way, because the the um the downside of the family saga is sometimes that it can be romanticized, or we're going to assume it's going to be romanticized. This is my roots, these are my family, this is fantastic. And you plant that flag right away, saying, oh yeah, don't have any illusions about the people that you're about to meet. And I just find that really refreshing. I felt it was disarming and just a relief to know that we're not going to be just meeting these heroic, iconic figures. We're going to meet real people, and understand their failings and their foibles, and that's true to life. That I'm in for.
yeah, exactly. Um, and so another detail for people to notice here is that because I had another editor before and I had some feedback, and it was one thing because I think this is really essential to nonfiction, creative nonfiction, is that idea of how many details and how do you present the details. So on the chapter where it says Hel Peninsula, Northern Poland, that first part that's in purple reads a lot more like a story, and possibly even more like fiction, because so it starts with closing her eyes, Paula could feel the warmth of the sun on her face, and the pale yellow sand slipping beneath her toes. But we took that away because I wasn't very comfortable with that either. And on the second one, the chapter 3, we basically start by talking directly to the reader. So I'm starting the family story with my grandmother. Warning, please don't get too attached to the young woman you're about to meet, which is what you were just mentioning. But it's that idea that it's more, now I'm talking to the reader instead of just telling a story.
Yeah, yeah, that was very interesting. I think one of the things that it's one of those things that people need to think about that question about how much do you want to fictionalize things in the past where you were not there. It's not your story, and that question comes up right away. And this was a real problem to solve with this one, right? And your comfort level is much closer to the journalistic reportage than it is to historical fiction. Everybody has to make those decisions. Where do they land on that spectrum? And then dive in and develop it from there. But it was really interesting working with you to see what is your set point. It was very clearly, okay, I want this to be the historical record, and you've got great stuff you can quote and material you can pull in from what your grandparents actually wrote. But you did not feel comfortable just making this up, Bridgerton style. So okay, let's respect that. How do we do it? How do you do it? What do you want that to be? So this combination, talking directly to the reader, and then we go into this very crisp summary of that time period. And then we start to meet the girl. That seemed a truer, it was much truer to you as a writer. And that is always the thing, right? The person behind the book has to feel confident in what she's bringing to the story and how she's presenting it. So I thought these were good choices that you made.
Exactly. And that brings us to that little blue highlight of the interwar period where I literally give the context of where we are, what's happening in the world so people can understand that. And then that idea that what happens too is this is the chapter with how my grandparents meet, my maternal grandparents. But the next part then just makes a lot more sense. And it makes sense, the context and history, we sort of place it, which makes a lot more sense, I think. And then we come back to it later in other chapters.
Yep.
All right, next. Oh, this is the fun chapter. This chapter is really interesting because we actually wound up incorporating shoes and fashion into the rest of the book. I don't know, it's weird. My family was like fleeing the war and we're still talking about my grandmother's bridal gown, right? So
And the shoes at church.
and the shoes, right? That's one of the
Yes.
things she took with her. So it's sort of like this element that just keeps being repeated. And that's, I think it was this chapter that made us both realize that there was a very strong theme of fashion and art and architecture that just threaded throughout the book. And it was basically necessary to dedicate an entire chapter to it as we, because it really made a huge difference in my family.
Yeah, I love this. And this is chapter 18. So you're getting towards the end of the book, but it's really close to the emotional core. And what's so interesting is it's this wonderful, this, first of all, there's a great story that's embedded in this chapter, which is fantastic. It's your story.
Yeah.
But it is a story that pulls on these themes that run all the way through the family's account. And it was fascinating to sort of track that and say, okay, why don't you just use this whole chapter to bring these themes to the fore? That these are fashion, art, love of beautiful things, and the lengths to which people will go in the family to find, preserve, cultivate, whatever those things. So it's all capsulated here, but this chapter in a way is also like a clue to so many other things about how the family functions, and the good and bad, right? It's a wonderful little standalone piece. And that, it's one of my favorites. It's so interesting. And because a lot of the story, the backdrop is war and, trauma and displacement. So to have a chapter on fashion and art is also it's also such a relief, right? It's this joyful, playful sense of, people are living their lives, even with war as a backdrop, even with displacement as a backdrop. They're living their lives and their values come to the fore. And this is such a great chapter that just highlights that in such a fun way.
It was kind of important for me too, not to have it be just this depressing, heavy book the whole time.
No, you can't. It's not even true to life, right? I mean, wherever
people
go, they're still carrying all their values, their memories, the things they love the most that they're attached to. That's the beauty of the human story. It's all of that stuff together.
Exactly.
So thank you for that. Thanks for doing it.
My pleasure. Thank you. So this is just to show people actually just so you can see how we were working a little bit. So basically Susan was, I'll just read it right off the screen, that you were repositioning the text and drawing out my stories right up until the very end. And then sometimes I would write everything out on the side of what I really wanted to say. And you'd be like, well, we're just going to copy and paste this right in. So that was pretty funny. I thought that was really interesting how we did that.
Yeah, this is so great, right? This was, you persuaded me to work in Google Docs, which I really didn't want to do, and I hated the idea of doing it.
No.
But eventually, slowly, kind of came around, and it meant that anytime there was a change in real time, you would get the notification, or I would get a notification that you could go right away and look at the document. So you had this fantastic live margin to work in. And that became, another venue for us to have these conversations. And it is true that I would ask a question like, why is this here? Or can you explain? Or I'm not sure, I don't get this. And you would give the explanation, and invariably it would be the explanation that just needed to be in the text, which was great. So that was a gift to me as an editor, like, oh yes, I'm just going to lift this out and plunk it in here and we'll just massage it a bit. But that's a natural editing process, right? The author already is the font of knowledge, and the editor's job is just to stand back and recognize the patterns, see what's there that is already in the author. It's in her heart, it's in her mind, it's in her story, and the editor's job is just there to draw that out. So this was a really fun way of doing that. And yeah, I think it's a good way for people to see how you can do it. You don't just have to do the line edits. The conversations in the margins are very enlivening.
And we'll note too that because it's sort of a live or a breathing document, we'll call it that instead of Word. The one thing that we did too is we respected each other, that when I was working on it, Susan wasn't coming in looking and fiddling while I was in it. And the same as when I knew she was working in the document, my computer was off. I was not paying attention to it, even though it was nail biting and I really wanted to, but
yeah, that's good. That's actually helpful. I find the editing process on my end is very alive, and I will try something out and then I'll sleep on it and come back and change it and try it again and try it again. So, having the space on the editor's side for that fluidity is also really helpful. And you really, as you say, if you treat it as a living document, then that you're both trying to tend that garden at the same time. That sometimes takes a little bit of time. That's why the conversations went on for months.
That's right.
That's why it says that.
That's true. I'm going to remove this from the screen so people can see us. But that was the one great thing too, is because I had, like you said before, so much documentation from my family, old letters and everything, that's what we were able to do, is have those papers go back and forth too, while we tried to figure out what's important, what's not, what should be in there. Because we wound up cutting a lot, quite a lot of things, quite a lot of letters that my mother had written in that. So that was really fun. That was quite the experience for me actually too, to see how much got cut. I wasn't afraid of cutting, but I think we wound up cutting about 6,000 or 7,000 words at the end of the day, maybe more, 10, maybe 10. It was a lot.
No, and the nice way, if you flip it around, it's all about selection.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's just what to select, and that means cutting is the negative space that you're creating because you've selected certain things and brought them to the fore. Of course, it's the nature of story making.
Exactly. So I think that's a good information for everybody today. We do invite you, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, leave comments. You're more than welcome to find us on social media as well. All of that is up. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us. Make sure to like and follow us, and we will see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.